Hi, everyone. My name is Ethan Landers, and I'm an undergraduate senior enrolled in CS 625 at Old Dominion University in the spring semester of 2024. This is my semester project for the course. So, in my search for a data set to utilize for this semester project, I found this data set by Netflix. This data set publishes weekly data since 2021 on four categories of entertainment, including English films, non-English films, English TV shows and non-English TV shows. Basically, for each category, every week they publish the top 10 rankings for that said category. And what makes it into the top 10 for each category is the number of views they receive. So it's the most viewed content on Netflix that makes it into that top 10 ranking for each of these four categories. And these types of entertainment, these categories of entertainment are sorted from highest views to lowest views within that top 10 ranking. There's many things that this data set contains per category of film. It contains the week of the top 10 ranking, runtimes of that category of entertainment. For example, that would be the runtime of a film or a TV show. It will list that title as well. It'll list weekly views of that piece of entertainment, among many other things. The data set also comes in Excel format. But for this project, I utilize Google Colab. And for that reason, it utilizes Python. And I converted the document to .csv. So it would be much easier to read into Google Colab through Python for manipulation and visualization. So thinking about what I could do with this data that I found from Netflix, I came up with three questions to answer. So the first question was, does the runtime of Netflix films influence their weekly viewership? So my thought process was that let's say we have Oppenheimer that came out in 2023. Oppenheimer was about 3 hours long and it was extremely popular. So my question I wanted to answer was, for instance, do longer films see increased viewership? That's kind of a question I wanted to answer. And then another sub question of that main question was, I wanted to look at the top 50 Netflix films in this data set. And I wanted to determine the same thing, whether their runtime influences weekly viewership. Another question I wanted to answer was looking at calendar seasons, so spring, summer, fall, winter. So I wanted to see whether viewership for Netflix films was the highest during the winter compared to all other calendar seasons. This would give me an overview, a comprehensive look at Netflix films in general. So what I did next was I visualized that first question. Does the runtime of Netflix films influence their weekly viewership? So there were a few things I did here. I filtered the data set to only look at films from Netflix's top 10 rankings for 2023 and 2024. And I did that because those were the only years that recorded runtimes for films. The data set started recording in 2021, but until 2023, they did not include runtimes for the films that were listed in the data set. So this was the only data available to me where I could make a comparison between runtime and weekly views. To best answer this question, I created a scatter plot. So on the x-axis visualizes the runtime and the y-axis is weekly views. And those are both in hours. One of the things that I had to do in terms of preparation to visualize this data set was grouping the films by title, because there were many instances in the data set where there would be several weeks with top 10 rankings for each category of film. And although I'm looking at films, I'm looking at non-English films and English films here. And I would see that a lot of times the same film would appear for several weeks in the top 10 rankings. So a movie stayed in the top 10 ranking for every week of March, for instance. And therefore, when I plotted this, there was a lot of redundant points. So in order to prevent the repetition and redundancy of plotting those same points over and over again, same film with the same runtime, just maybe a different week, I grouped it and I then took averages of the weekly views and runtime for those films. And I basically did that because I felt that it was important to do so, because if there were any inconsistencies in that data being published, just to get an average of, maybe several weeks, maybe if there was a change in the runtime, if just to keep it consistent, basically an average I wanted to plot here. And I also took the number of times that it appeared, the number of weeks that it appeared in the data set, and I saved that as well. That came in handy to answer the second question here. My findings was that a majority of the films that did make it into that top 10 ranking had an average runtime between 1.4 to 2.4 hours and an average weekly view ranking of about 1 million to 10 million. There were a lot of outliers I saw with some much higher than average viewership. I saw the highest one was above 28 million views for a film. I just really noted that there was a very weak positive trend in the data here. And overall, I couldn't see an overall trend. I mean, it was so weak, this positive trend. So I would say for looking at all films when comparing the runtime and weekly viewership, there was no significant trend to be found. And this was just for the years 2023 and 2024 that I could do that comparison. Here is my first question I answered in Google Colab. This is for demonstration of the interactability of this visualization. So You can zoom in, you can zoom out on the data. You can also hover over specific points and see the runtime, weekly views, and that film title. You can do it for all these films for 2023 and 2024. The same thing here when looking at the sub question. I wanted to look at the top 50 Netflix films and look at the same thing, runtime versus weekly viewership. And that manifested itself into a scatter plot. Same thing, runtime on the x-axis and weekly views on the y-axis. Basically, I used my data preparation from the previous question, and the films that appeared the most in the top 10 rankings throughout all the weeks that the data was published, I took the top 50 from that. So for instance, if a film appeared 15 times within the weekly rankings, it was just consistently always in the top 10 rankings, no matter the week. It was one of these top 50 films. And I did notice that there was a positive trend here. I noticed that, yes, there were a lot less points, but there was a much stronger trend of data here. Longer films did tend to have higher viewership here. I did observe 3 notable outliers. This data is for the years 2023 and 2024. I noted that the movie Damsel, Leave the World Behind, and Jawan Extended Cut, they were significant outliers here. Damsel and the Leave the World Behind, they had really high weekly views, while Jawan Extended Cut, it had an unusually long runtime. So they didn't really fit in that trend because they were far outliers, but still with the rest of the data points, there was a positive trend to be observed. So my conclusion with this is that the top 50 Netflix films in 2023 and 2024, it was noted that the longer runtimes generally correlated with higher weekly viewerships. Here's the runtime versus weekly viewership of the top 50 Netflix films for 2023 and 2024. The interactability is the same as the previous visualization. You can hover over each point, see the runtime, weekly views, and film title. You can zoom in, zoom out. The next question I wanted to ask was, is viewership for Netflix films the highest during the winter compared to all other calendar seasons? I basically, in order to prepare the data set to visualize this, I had to group the films based on season. So the data set didn't originally come with what season they were released. They were only came with the week of that top 10 ranking. So I had to assign a season string to each week for the rows of the categories of entertainment. And then I grouped them all together, all of the commonalities that, all the common films that shared similar seasons, and in order to get the total viewership. And yeah, I just thought a bar chart would be really good to show that difference between the calendar seasons here. And it was noted that winter was in fact the season with the, highest total viewership. And just to clarify, I was able to use data from 2021 because I wasn't necessarily looking at runtime. Like I said before, runtime started getting recorded in this data set in 2023, but that wasn't really used in this question. So I was able to look at all the data here because weekly viewerships have always been recorded. Winter was the top season with the most amount of weekly views of all time, total viewership, while fall followed, then summer, and then spring. Here's the visualization for the total viewership per calendar season of Netflix films looking at 2021 and onwards. Look at the interactability of this data set. This is in Google Colab once again. You can basically hover your cursor over each bar of the visualization and see the calendar season and that total viewership number, the specific number. And again, here you can see that winter has the highest total viewership at around 1.55 billion. So there was a discussion post thread that we had to post some original questions that we had for this data sets where we think we wanted to guide our project, but I did refine my questions subtly. I asked the professor for permission and it was granted. And mainly the reasons why I updated the questions was just for clear phrasing, for better understanding and alignment with project goals. I really wanted to change my focus and just focus on English and non-English films. I wanted to have like a robust analysis where I could have looking at 2 main questions and a sub question, look at those. I wanted to come to a conclusion from all of the questions because for the season question, the calendar season question, I was almost going to include TV shows, but by doing so, the first question, a half sub question, a main question, I didn't include TV shows in that. I think it would have just been almost extraneous information, and I wanted to come up with that robust conclusion based on just looking at films. I just wanted to look at this subset. And some of the things noted with the development process was that I used the Python library Altair to make these visualizations interactive because I started with Matplotlib and Seaborn, which is something I was really comfortable with. And I switched to Altair just to improve interactability and just take these visualizations up a notch. And it was a learning process, learning this new Python library. I'd never worked with Altair before, but through making mistakes, through trial and error, I was able to learn the syntax and develop effective visualization. And I do see myself using that library in the future. To conclude, I wanted to investigate the correlation between film runtime and weekly views in Netflix top 10 rankings each week. And I also wanted to explore viewership trends based on calendar seasons on Netflix. And I discovered that the top 50 films, they showed that longer runtimes correlated with higher viewership. I also noted that films that made it into the top 10 weekly rankings in the wintertime had the highest total viewership across all seasons. My recommendations to Netflix include releasing longer films to boost viewership and schedule major film releases during the winter for optimal viewership. I really think that Netflix could leverage these insights to enhance viewership and strategic planning for film releases on Netflix.